Officially, at least according to what the public knows, 9 countries across the world are recognized as having nuclear weapons. You have the United States, Russia, China, France, the United Kingdom, Israel, which has never officially admitted to it, North Korea, India, as well as Pakistan. Now, ever since these weapons were invented, never have 2 nuclear-armed powers fought one another directly, except India and Pakistan. You see, in 1998, Pakistan officially became a nuclear power after they detonated 5 nuclear bombs in an underground testing site. The next year, which was 1999, you saw the Kargil War between India and Pakistan. This was a roughly 3-month-long conflict in the disputed Kashmir region. When all the dust settled, roughly 1,000 soldiers were dead and another 2,000 wounded, with both sides sustaining heavy casualties. Now, during the conflict, the Pakistani government sought out help from the Americans in order to de-escalate the situation. And it was during this time that the BBC reported the following, citing Mr. Bruce Riedel, who was then a high-level aide to President Bill Clinton. Quote, Pakistan deployed nuclear weapons for a possible attack against India in 1999, but was persuaded by the US not to launch them. What happened was that in late June, successful Indian counterattacks on Pakistan-occupied positions around Kargil in Kashmir and Islamabad's diplomatic isolation raised the possibility of a Pakistani defeat. According to Mr. Riedel, this is when the U.S. became aware Pakistan was preparing to use nuclear weapons, and President Clinton intervened to prevent their launch. Now, fortunately, this conflict ended in July of 1999 without nuclear weapons having been used. But honestly, if what this White House aide said was true, that was pretty close. And the turmoil, of course, did not end there. Not long afterwards, there was a military coup which occurred in Pakistan and saw the prime minister get ousted. The Taliban penetrated deep into the Pashtun region in the northwest. Within 2 years, we of course saw 9/11, which threw U.S. forces into Pakistan as they were fighting over in Afghanistan. And all the while, tensions between India and Pakistan, they never went away. In fact, to this very day, if you go on Google Maps, you'll find that the Himalayan region known as Kashmir, which borders India, Pakistan, and China, is drawn in a dashed line, indicating that it's a disputed territory with conflicting claims between all 3 countries. Now, setting China aside for the moment, just between India and Pakistan, they both claim full ownership of the Kashmir region, but as a practical matter, it is split, with part of it being administered by Indian authorities and the other part by Pakistani authorities. Also, relevant to our discussion is the fact that the people of Kashmir are majority Muslim, and the Pakistani government, which is also Muslim, they have been openly providing both moral as well as diplomatic support to those people's efforts at self-determination, meaning the Kashmiri people's efforts to break away from the Hindu-majority Indian rule. Now, the full history of the conflict between India and Pakistan, including the story of how Pakistan came to be its own country in the 1940s, as well as why the Kashmir region was not cleanly split between the 2 countries when they broke apart, is far outside the scope of our video today. I'll actually throw the links to several other videos that go into much greater depth about this whole history. You can find them down in the description box below if you're interested in going deeper into the subject matter. What I want to focus on today is the current situation between India and Pakistan, where you have 2 nuclear-armed nations, which by some accounts appear to really be on the brink of war. If we rewind the clock back about a week, right after Easter Sunday, there was a terror attack in Kashmir, specifically a part of Kashmir that is administered by India. What happened, at least according to the official sources, is that at a popular tourist spot, you had gunmen who disguised themselves by dressing up as locals, approached tourists, and they asked those tourists what their religion was. If the tourists said that they were Hindu, then they were shot right there at point-blank range. This resulted in the death of 26 people. One woman who survived this horrific attack recounted what happened. Here's her story as published in the Associated Press. Quote, when Aishanya and Shubham Dwivedi married in February, they began planning a vacation to Indian-controlled Kashmir to celebrate. As the couple paused for a snack in its lush Pahalgam meadow surrounded by snow-capped Himalayan peaks, a man approached them from behind. He didn't look threatening at first. She thought he might be a local guide. She said the man looked at the couple with piercing eyes and asked one question: "Are you a Hindu or a Muslim?" If they were Muslim, he said, they should recite the Islamic Declaration of Faith. The couple froze. Aishanya thought it was perhaps some local performance. "We are Hindus," her husband said. Without hesitation, the man pulled out a gun and shot him point blank in the head. Her husband collapsed on her, soaking her in blood. The man turned the gun on her, then changed his mind. She heard the man, joined by other attackers, tell tourists, "Tell your government, tell Modi what we did." The tourists ran for their lives. Now, shortly after this absolute tragedy, a new militant group calling itself the Kashmir Resistance took credit for this particular attack. However, the Indian government didn't believe that this was just some independent terrorist group, and instead, the Indian government blamed the Pakistani government for supporting this massacre. The Indian government, they specifically did not give any concrete evidence that this was the case, that the Pakistani government was supporting this massacre. However, they said that they were. In a speech delivered on April 23rd, shortly after the attack, here's what India's Foreign Secretary had to say.
The Cabinet Committee on Security met this evening under the chairmanship of the Honorable Prime Minister. The CCS was briefed in detail on the terrorist attack on 22nd April 2025 in Pahalgam in Jammu and Kashmir, in which 25 Indians and one Nepali citizen were killed. In the briefing to the CCS, the cross-border linkages of the terrorist attack were brought out.
With cross-border linkages referring to links between the terrorist group in Kashmir with people in Pakistan across the border. But again, no details were given about the nature of these links. And also, the Pakistani government, for their part, have denied any involvement in this particular attack. However, this lack of evidence given to the public did not stop the chain of escalation. All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. Listen, it's obvious that the financial system is not looking too great. After being pumped up with trillions of virtually free government dollars for many, many years now, well, the stock bubble might actually burst in the near future. And in that process, unfortunately, it could take away the nest egg of anyone who happens to be exposed to it. And so consider taking this opportunity to diversify into something which is beyond the grasp of Washington, D.C. and Wall Street, physical gold and silver. And the best company to use, in my opinion, is the sponsor of today's episode, American Hartford Gold, who I should mention is also my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. And besides myself, they have thousands of 5-star reviews from other Americans, and they also have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. And working with them is rather simple. They have a huge selection of coins, bars, and rounds to choose from. They have super friendly staff who you can call, and they can set up either gold delivery directly to your doorstep, or they can even set you up in a gold IRA. And then lastly, best of all, if you tell them the Roman sent you, they will throw in a free gold coin with your first qualifying purchase. So give them a call. The number is 866-242-2352. That's 866-242-2352. Or you can simply text Roman to 65532. I'll also throw a link to their webpage. It'll be down there in the description box below. In that very same speech from the Indian Foreign Secretary, the Indian government, they announced that a water treaty signed all the way back in the 1960s will be suspended immediately. Here's specifically what he said.
The Indus Waters Treaty of 1960 will be held in abeyance with immediate effect until Pakistan credibly and irrevocably abjures its support for cross-border terrorism.
For your reference, abeyance means that it's suspended. And this was really a serious move. If you look at a map, it's clear how important the Indus River system is to Pakistan. The Indus River itself, it runs pretty much the length of the country, and it provides 80% of the water that's needed for both agriculture as well as hydroelectric power. Meaning, as a practical matter, that the Indus River is Pakistan's lifeline. And this lifeline, it was secured back in the 1960s with the signing of the Indus Water Treaty. Brokered by the World Bank and signed by both Pakistan and India in the year 1960, the Indus Treaty, it allowed for both countries to develop freely, knowing that the river system will be freely shared and secured by both. You see, the Indus River system as a whole is actually made up of 6 rivers in total. You have the Indus River, the Jhelum, the Chenab, the Ravi, the Bias, and the Sutlej. And I might have completely mispronounced some of those names. I apologize if I did. Regardless, though, the treaty, it divided the rivers between the two countries as follows. You had the western rivers go to Pakistan, meaning the Indus, the Jhelum, and the Chenab, and then India got control of the three eastern rivers, meaning the Ravi, the Bias, and the Sutlej. And one of the most important points in this particular treaty is that India could not use the western rivers, the ones that flow into Pakistan, for things like storage or building large dam projects on, because it would affect Pakistan's water supply. And specifically, if you again look at a map and you note that the Indus River flows southwest, it becomes obvious how much of a choke point it actually is. If India decided to stop the river flow in the north, then most of Pakistan would immediately experience a water shortage. Now, thankfully for Pakistan, this has never happened. Even during the two wars between the countries, one in 1971 and the earlier one in 1965, as well as the other war we mentioned in 1999, the treaty has remained in place and no water shortages occurred. However, this time it appears to be different. With this announcement from the Indian Foreign Secretary, the Indus Waters Treaty has been suspended until, quote, Pakistan credibly and irrevocably abjures its support for cross-border terrorism. Now, just for your reference, the definition of abjures is basically solemnly renounce. However, given the fact that the Pakistani government denies any involvement, it seems to be a stalemate on this particular point. The Indian government wants them to solemnly renounce their support, while the Pakistani government says there was never any support. Also, the Pakistani government issued a warning of their own, saying that any attempt to stop or to divert the flow of water into Pakistan would be considered an act of war and met with, quote, full force across the complete spectrum of Pakistan's power. Now, in order to flesh out what that actually means, you had the Pakistani Minister of Defense go on Sky News to give an interview in order to present his side of the argument. And interestingly, it was a 15-minute-long interview, and not only did he deny Pakistan's involvement in this attack, but he actually spent roughly half of the interview with Sky News explaining how the terror attack, in his opinion, was likely a false flag staged event on the part of the Indian government. And then, when asked specifically about the prospect of a kinetic, hot war with India, here was his response.
We are already prepared for it, We are already prepared for it. Any eventuality which takes place in next 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 days or week or 10 days, we'll retaliate and we'll react to that, in kind, inshallah.
How will you respond if India does launch a series of airstrikes?
We will measure our response to whatever is initiated by India according to that. It would be a measured response. If there is an all-out, attack or something like that, then obviously there will be an all-out war. And if it is something...
And that's what I wanted to get to. We're talking about two nuclear powers. Should the world be worried about this moment?
Yes, I think so. The clash between two nuclear powers is always worrisome.
Now, I will mention, just as a caveat to that interview, that it is always important to remember the context of those types of interviews, as well as their intended audience. When you have the defense minister of the fifth most populous nation in the world talking about the specter of nuclear war, well, he knows the kind of panic that might cause. And he knows very well that might push other world leaders to come in and to try to help Pakistan de-escalate the situation. And frankly, this is one of those classic problems with war reporting. Any news or any statements that come out from either side, they have multiple intended effects, and it's always hard as a media outlet, any media outlet, ours included, to not just be used by one side or the other to shape public opinion to a certain end. And so do keep that in mind when you listen to those type of statements, and also statements like these. This also came from the Pakistani defense minister, and he said that, quote, a military incursion by India was imminent. Now, thus far, that has not happened, although there have been some reported gunshots fired between the two sides on either side of the Kashmir dividing line of control between the Pakistani and the Indian side, but those reports are unconfirmed. Regardless of that, though, I think that most people can agree that a kinetic war between two nuclear armed powers is really not a good outcome, especially when you consider the population density involved. A nuclear war over Kashmir between India and Pakistan would take place in one of the densest population pockets on the planet between the first and the fifth most populous nations, which I think is something that we all hope doesn't occur. But the tit-for-tat escalation is already underway. Besides the suspension of the water treaty that we mentioned earlier, the Indian government, they also revoked the visas for Pakistani nationals, and they closed the main border crossing between the two countries. And then, as a response to that, the Pakistani government, they retaliated by canceling visas issued to Indian nationals. They closed their airspace to Indian airlines, and they suspended all trade with India, which honestly wasn't that much. It was 4% of their imports, but those imports were things like medical devices, electronics, and auto parts, so pretty important industries. Also, as I mentioned earlier, there have been some unconfirmed reports that Indian and Pakistani troops have exchanged gunfire along the border in Kashmir on multiple occasions since those terror attacks on April 22nd, but again, unconfirmed reports. Now, where this will all lead is anyone's guess, but it does unfortunately create a situation where nuclear powers are on the brink of war with one another in a heavily populated area. I guess that we can just hope for the best. If you'd like to go deeper into this particular story, I will throw the links to several research resources down into the description box below. And also I'll mention that I'm in no way even pretending to be an expert on India-Pakistani affairs. And so if you know something that I missed in this episode, but that piece of knowledge is really pertinent to the story, please leave it in the comments section below. Both myself and probably anyone watching this video would appreciate it. I mean, this conflict, it didn't arise overnight. There's a lot of history involved. There's a lot of backstory. And so if you really do know something that you want to share, please leave it down there. I try to read the comments on all my videos, and I'll be reading them tonight. I'll be reading them into the week, into the weekend. And so I will appreciate any context that you can provide, as I'm sure anyone interested in the story would as well. And then also, as you're making your way down there, please take a quick moment to smash those like and subscribe buttons so that this content can reach ever more people via the YouTube algorithm. And then, until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free.